Hello everyone, welcome to the new lecture. Now, this lecture is my personal favorite because it integrates a lot of clinical applications along with a lot of conceptual knowledge. So, like for example, if you see the classes on neurochemistry, there are some topics like say neuropeptides. Now, yes, we do understand that prescribing out, I mean, the take home point from those lectures are like prescribing T3, that is triiodothyronine, to a patient who is euthyroid but is having depressive symptoms. But there is a lot of theory over there, and like the short notes of CCK and neuropeptide Y. So those things are a little bit, are not a little bit, they're almost 98% theoretical, and they're just for exams sake. But these kind of topics that we're going to discuss today are what actually makes someone get interested in neuropsychiatry, because this is core neuropsychiatric topic. Now, coming to the topic for today, it is parietal lobe, the right parietal lobe. What are the functions of right parietal lobe? And mainly we will focus on what happens when there is damage to the right parietal lobe, and what are the tests to determine the damage that has happened to the right parietal lobe. So, there is a different lecture on neuroanatomy of parietal lobe. This one is right parietal lobe, and there will be another topic covering the left parietal lobe. Now, the clinical presentations when there is any damage to the right parietal lobe is very different from the clinical presentation that happens when damage is in the left parietal lobe. So, let's start with a little bit of recap of the parietal lobe neuroanatomy. So, we all know about this, but just for quick recap, parietal lobe. So, it consists almost 1/5 of the cerebral cortex, 1/5 of the cerebral cortex, and it receives projections from the frontal, occipital, and temporal lobes, and can be considered as an association cortex. Now, in our university exam, there was a question on association cortices. Association cortices. Now, there are many areas in the brain that are termed as association cortices, and parietal lobe is actually one of them, because the parietal lobe receives input from the frontal lobe, from the temporal lobe, and from the occipital lobe, and it integrates that information, whether it is visual through the occipital lobe, auditory through the temporal lobe, or any somatosensory information from the frontal lobe. As we know, the postcentral area of the frontal lobe, of the parietal lobe, and also some information from the frontal lobe. It will integrate it, and it will help in guiding our behavior. So, coming to a little bit of the anatomy part. So, I will just keep it very simple. So, the anterior boundary of the parietal lobe is the central sulcus. I will refer to this picture. So, this is the anterior boundary by the central sulcus. The primary sensory cortex is the postcentral gyrus, area 3, 1, 2. So, here we have, this is the postcentral gyrus. Postcentral gyrus. And we have Brodmann's area 3, 1, 2 over there, which is the primary sensory cortex. Next, we have the area posterior to the postcentral sulcus is divided into the superior parietal lobule, that is the SPL, and the inferior parietal lobule, that is the IPL, by the intraparietal sulcus, which runs anteroposteriorly from the postcentral sulcus. So, what we have is here the anteroposteriorly we have the postcentral sulcus, and it divides it into the SPL, that is the superior parietal lobule, and the IPL, that is the inferior parietal lobule. The Sylvian fissure, as you can see, as you know, this is the Sylvian fissure or the lateral fissure. The Sylvian fissure forms the inferior boundary of parietal lobe. So, if this is the parietal lobe, then this will be the inferior boundary. This is the anterior boundary, anterior, inferior. Especially the posterior part of the Sylvian fissure is forming the inferior boundary. Its posterior part extends into the parietal lobe. As you can see, the Sylvian fissure posterior part is going into the parietal lobe. Now, why I am showing you this picture is because it is something that you can replicate in the examination. I can show you, and I will show you anatomical models when I talk about pure anatomy of the parietal lobe, which was again a very repeated university question. But for this part that you have to understand and replicate in exam, I think this is a pretty decent diagram. Next is the part of the IPL, that is the inferior parietal lobule, which surrounds the posterior part of the Sylvian fissure. So as you can see, this is the IPL and this is surrounding the posterior part of the Sylvian fissure is called supramarginal gyrus. Supramarginal gyrus. So we have over here SMG. Supramarginal gyrus is a part of the IPL and it is bordering the end of the lateral sulcus or the Sylvian fissure. Next we have the superior temporal sulcus also extends into the posterior part of the IPL. So this is the superior temporal sulcus which is also going into the posterior part of the IPL. The part of this is the superior temporal sulcus. This is the Sylvian posterior part of the Sylvian fissure. So this is the superior temporal sulcus and it is also going into the inferior parietal lobule and that part is called the angular gyrus. That is the part of the IPL which surrounds the superior temporal sulcus is called the angular gyrus. So again, very simple, quick recap. We have a central sulcus over here. This is our central sulcus. This is our lateral fissure or Sylvian fissure. This is divided by the intraparietal sulcus into the superior parietal lobule and the inferior parietal lobule. This is the IPL. And in the IPL, at the end of the Sylvian fissure, we have the supramarginal gyrus SMG. And at the end of the superior temporal sulcus, we have the angular gyrus or the AG. So this picture is clear, I hope. Right. Now on the medial surface, the main area of the parietal lobe is the paracentral lobule. So for that I need to show you the cross section basically. Now inferior and posterior to this is the retrosplenial cortex, which is important for topographic orientation. Which is actually the posterior part of the singular gyrus. So as you know that the singular gyrus is there, the posterior part is called the retrosplenial cortex and it is important for topographic orientation. All these details of anatomy will go when we will talk about the anatomy of the parietal lobe in details. But for now, we will stick to the right parietal lobe and its dysfunctions. So let's start with a clinical case. So let us start with a question. A 34-year-old man has an RTA, road traffic accident. After that, he has a hemorrhage in right parietal lobe. Now, please remember this type of hemorrhage is very rare because usually when the hemorrhage occurs and since the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe are in close proximity, so the temporal lobe is the parieto-temporal hemorrhage is actually more common if you see the CT scan reports. But then let's consider for a clinical case that there is hemorrhage in the right parietal lobe. And after that patient was managed and patient was sent back home and he was on regular physiotherapy because he was also having some sort of weakness. But after that, because there was some sort of subcortical bleeding also in the right basal ganglia. So there was some left hemiparesis. Left hemiparesis was noted. So at time of discharge from hospital, power was of upper limb and lower limb was 2/5. Okay. Then you see the patient after 3 months follow up. Here you see the limb power has improved to 4 out of 5. He can now walk with the help of a stick. But the complaint is that patient is often unable to gauge the distance between objects and himself. That is, he runs into things very easily. That is, suppose he is trying to go to the washroom, or suppose he is going through a door, or even suppose he is climbing the staircase. What is happening is he is running into things like the walls, he is missing some of the steps. So these kind of focal neurological deficits, FNDs, focal neurological deficits, are observed in the patient. Now, why is it so? The question arises. Now, let's come into the core neuropsychiatric aspect. The right parietal lobe. The right parietal lobe integrates multiple streams of sensory data, which you must understand that the sensory data, to form a body schema, which determines the relations of our body part to ourselves and to other objects in extrapersonal space. That is, I know that this water bottle is just how far it is. So while I am looking at the camera, I can still extend my hand and I can grasp the water bottle and I can bring it over here. But suppose if I was having some right parietal lobe dysfunction, I will fumble. I will not be able to gauge the distance. Again, please understand that it incorporates the sensory data to form a body schema. So I have my body schema. I know that where I am sitting, and I know that the relation of my body part with external objects in the extrapersonal space. It also integrates orientation of different objects in extrapersonal space to each other with reference to our body. Just as I said, that how far is, suppose, this glass from me. I can say that. Even without looking also, I can bring in a completely new object. So all of these things is because my occipital lobe is sending some visual data, and my right parietal lobe is basically encoding it and then interpreting it and is understanding that what is the relation of me with the object, how far is the object, and how much I need to extend my hand and quickly get the object. Okay. So there are at least 4 syndromes that can happen apart from cortical sensory loss. Cortical sensory loss will definitely occur if the area that is involved is the post central gyrus, that is the Brodmann's area 3, 1, 2, that is the somatosensory cortex. If that is affected, then definitely there will be some sort of sensory loss. That is a different issue altogether. But there are 4 things that might happen. One is hemi-neglect, the other is constructional apraxia, other is dressing apraxia, and topographical disorientation. Now, for apraxia, we will discuss that in details when we will talk about the left parietal lobe, because we need to understand what is praxis, what is the normal procedure for praxis, and then we will understand what is apraxia. So all the different types of apraxia, that is ideomotor apraxia, ideational apraxia, limb kinetic apraxia, all these things can occur in left parietal lobe lesions. Even this dressing apraxia and constructional apraxia, that can also occur in left parietal lobe lesion, but they are more profound in right parietal lobe region. We will take each of these symptoms and we will decode them. We will try to understand the basic neurological mechanism. What is the neurobiological mechanism behind development of this particular symptom? And then we will also see the clinical tests that we can do to a patient on bedside or in our clinic very easily to determine what kind of syndrome or symptom the patient is suffering from to make a proper diagnosis.